Hello, welcome back to Everard Junction, and today is a bit of a special video. So today I'm going to show you what I've been working on over the last couple of months really. It's taken a while to get it together, and while it's not scenic, the engineering as such is completed and it's all working, and that is getting the traffic to work on this stretch of road that comes out from over where that Sherpa van is. Comes out from there, runs past what will eventually be the station building and sort of the station side of the layout basically, around the long sweeping curve, and then over to some temporary buildings that I've got over there. So quite a long run. I've always wanted to experiment with getting cars to move on a model railway, ever since I saw the Falla car system all those years ago. And while the Falla system is impressive, for me it has a couple of downsides that have pushed me to experiment with something else that's on the market. Falla wasn't really going to work for me because of one major disadvantage, and that is these tiny little cars. It is just not possible to motorise them. At the moment, the smallest vehicle I have seen that works in Falla is something about the size of a Volkswagen Touareg. The system is limited to trucks, buses and vans. So when I randomly discovered this stuff about a year ago, I was really excited to try it out, as it meant that I could motorise or move the cars. And that for me is the most important part of getting a road system working. The cars need to move. I'm not fussed about trucks and buses. You might have seen one in a queue of traffic, but that queue of traffic is composed of cars. So instead of using Falla, I have gone with this stuff, which is called Magnorail, which is a Dutch company, and they have been around for a couple of years. And although I'm very impressed with the system, for some reason it doesn't seem to have caught on, certainly in the UK. Now I don't know if that's through lack of marketing or people just don't know about it or what, but I certainly haven't seen it on any British layouts. Okay, so let's hand over to myself. Some months ago when I started installing this, I previously put a short section of it together off camera to verify that I was happy with it and it was going to do what I wanted, and then we pick up the build later on. So in the set you get a number of things. First of all is a little pot of magnets and sliders for the vehicles, including a drill bit, very fine drill bit, to drill the pilot holes necessary to screw the track down to the deck. And you also get the track itself, bits of chain. You also get some return loops. These are very handy as they allow you to do a complete turnaround in a very small space. Get two of those. Again, this is all, it's a starter set, so it assumes you're starting from scratch. More track. That is the motor housing, and then there's the motor itself. This is the fast motor, as this is for road vehicles. 3 sets available, one for the bicycle, one for propelling a boat, and then one for cars. And then again we've got some more track and chain in there as well. I found when extending the set, apart from the unnecessary return loops that you get in the starter sets that you arguably don't need if you're just extending your current run, pretty much everything else included in the starter set, the chain, the track, the screws and the motor, and the vehicle sliders and the magnets, you do need all of that if you want to extend your existing set. So I found it was just easier to buy multiple starter sets depending on what I needed to do. So we can see we have a motor there on this side coming along down the street. That'll then go around the corner under the railway back round, and then you can see I've put a mark where the next motor is going to be. Again, it's not super accurate, but it's good to keep them roughly the same distance apart as per what it says in the instructions. These parts are for mounting the motors. You can see it's got a a special end on it that mates up with the housing for the motor. You get quite a number of these in each set. I'm not quite sure why. Certainly don't need that many. I've found one motor per starter set of Magnorail seems quite capable of moving everything along quite nicely. With the track now separated from the sprues, I can start laying it. It's very nice to work with. I'm not sure what the plastic they've used is, but it's extremely slippery and very flexible, very easy to work with. Joining it together couldn't be simpler. Just push it together and there you go. Okay, so the track is now returning back round. Got a corner just there, and now it's time to position the motor, as this is about the area where I wanted to place the motor, trying to keep the motors an equal sort of distance apart. So I've drawn around the motor housing, as you can see. It's positioned there. Again, it's not exactly where I marked it, but that's not going to be a problem as long as it's roughly right. That's okay. Draw some holes, jigsaw, cut it out. Okay, so there we go, hole for the motor. You can see I had a little bit of difficulty because I decided to put it smack bang in the middle of one of the supports for this deck, but managed to get it done nonetheless. I would recommend not doing something like that. Okay, I've run some wires, and now I'm just going to solder those to the motor. We'll look at where the wires go and how it's all powered later on, but for the moment the wires solder to the two terminals on the bottom of the motor, and it's worth making sure you get the polarity right. So if like me you're using more than one motor, you need to make sure that the wires are soldered the same way round on each motor. Otherwise you'll end up with one motor running in reverse and the other running forwards. Okay, I've got the chain all connected up. Unfortunately, I did run out of Magnorail for the last little bit. This section here needed about another 2 or 3 of the long lengths, but it does come with lots of those motor bracket supports, and I've accumulated quite a few of them. So what I've done is I've just chopped them up and screwed them down and butted the ends together. Okay, so now I'm going to start laying the chain. This is the most boring and labour intensive part of the process, but it certainly isn't as bad as respacing all of the sleepers on the layout, so I'll take that. You can see there's various different lengths of chain, and some of them have got different holes. It looks a little confusing at first. It's explained in the instructions. The different holes just allow you to run different types of slider on the road surface depending on the kit that you've bought. Okay, so now the chain is laid, going to go for a test run, and fingers crossed everything works okay. You can quite happily run Magnorail without a road over the top of it, should be okay. Obviously you can't run vehicles, but you can check that the chain runs properly. At the moment I'm just using a standard analog controller. I've got all 4 motors hooked up to the track feed on the back of this controller, which means that I can vary the speed of the system, and I can also change the direction. While we're talking about the direction, you can see that the chain does have a certain way round that it prefers to be fitted. You can see the rounded leading edge of the chain tends to go in the direction of travel, at least according to the instructions. So as this is a British model, the cars are travelling on the left hand side of the road in that direction. So I've orientated the chain that way round. The chain will run in reverse, but it's not quite as reliable as running in the directions as per the manual's illustration. Okay, so with everything connected, I should be able to power it up and run it in its entirety for the first time. Once it's running, it's a good idea to run it for a couple of minutes at least, just to make sure that it is working properly. The different lengths of chain allow you to adjust the chain's tension, so it's worth running it to see how it behaves before you commit to putting a road surface over the top of it. You need to make sure that the chain is happy. So if we look along here, you can see it's running quite nice in the track. It's not all bunched up. You can see I have a spot here where it is getting a little bit pushed. It is bunching up a little bit, but then as we get to the corner, it straightens out again. So if I put more tension on that by removing one of the longer links and replacing it with a shorter one, chances are the chain would be under too much tension and jump out of the track. So you've got to find the right amount of slop basically in the chain to a point where it's happy to run. There you can see the return loop in operation. It's a very clever idea. It just allows the chain to come back on itself with the minimal amount of friction. With regards to the noise that it makes, yes, it does make a noise, obviously. Of course it's going to make a noise. I would say this amount of Magnorail, which don't forget is running from over there all the way down here, It makes about the same amount of noise as one of these trains running around the layout. So while it does make a noise, I wouldn't consider it to be excessive. It makes about the same amount of noise as a train does. So if I got a couple of trains running on the layout, the noise this is making would soon be drowned out. Okay, so now it's time to create the road surface, and then we can finally run some cars. When it comes to doing the road surface, I've seen various techniques online. Different people have used different things. Magnorail recommend that the road surface that the cars are running on is no more than 0.5 millimetre thick. So that is indeed quite thin. The reason for that is to maximise the power of the magnets that's in the track, so that the vehicles stay on course. I've chosen to use some glossy photo paper, which is about 0.25 millimetres thick, so well under the restriction that is recommended in the manual. And by using the glossy paper, what I've done is I've put the glossy side facing the chain in the hope to try and reduce the amount of overall friction in the system. The non-glossy side faces what you can see now, and that can easily be airbrushed or painted by hand into a realistic looking road surface. The manual, and I would certainly recommend that you use card or paper, something of that nature. It would be tempting to use something like plasticard for this, but having such a long run of plasticard, it's going to change its shape depending on the temperature and time of year, season. Plasticard moves about quite a lot, so it's generally not recommended for using on this. You're better off with something like paper or card, as it's more stable. These little outriggers that stick out of the track, that's what the road surface is going to sit on. But obviously you've got gaps in the middle, gaps down the sides. So what I've seen a lot of people do is use strips of MDF or plywood to bolster the sort of bottom deck up to the correct height. Now that has its advantages, but you've got to cut lots of little bits of wood to certain sizes, can be quite time consuming. So I've decided to use some cork. This cork is 8 millimeters tall, and the track is near as damn it 8 millimeters tall. This is the sort of cork that you can buy from a DIY shop to do like the edging on some laminate flooring to cater for joints and stuff like that. It's geared to doing flooring in your house, but it happens to be the correct thickness. It's about 8 millimeters, and that is perfect. It's nice and flush with the tops of the Magnorail track, and then I can put the road surface straight across the top of that and be comfortable that it's going to be reasonably smooth. Another advantage of using the cork strips is when you get to a corner, going around the corner couldn't be easier. You simply bend the cork to the desired shape. Nice and easy to work with, no cutting timber up endlessly, and yeah, it's just a bit easier, at least in my experience. Okay, I'm going to make a start on gluing the cork down. I'm going to be using some Copydex adhesive, as I find it works particularly well with gluing down the cork. Okay, well most of the cork is now laid. You can see I've cut lots of small funny shaped little bits and pieces to fill in as many of the gaps as possible, and this is just to give as much support as possible to the road surface that is going over the top of all of this. You can see in places there aren't many supports for the road deck on the track, so I filled the gaps up with bits of cork, and the same is true for the whole length. Still doing a couple more bits here and there, but for the most part I'm quite happy with that. So now it's time to start laying the road surface. Laying the road is relatively straightforward provided you follow some basic steps. So this is the last piece, and I've made sure that I haven't glued it down at the end. Not doing that means that I can come along with a piece of sellotape and stick the paper to the sellotape. Now when I bring in the piece that's going to join, I can stick that onto the sellotape, and that will create a really smooth transition for the vehicles on the top and also the chain on the bottom. With that now taped, I can lift it, apply glue to the cork and some of the outriggers on the Magnorail, and stick the road surface down. And if the worst happens in future, and for whatever reason I need to get in here, this is only a piece of paper, so I can take a knife and cut into it to expose the area that requires repair, or if I'm lucky it may even just peel straight off, as I'm using the Copydex adhesive, which is not the strongest glue in the world. This is glossy photo paper that you would use in a printer. This is 0.25mm thick, and you can see it has a glossy, shiny side and a matte side. I'm putting the matte side on the top. This is the side that I will paint whatever colour I end up deciding to paint the road, and the shiny side should provide minimal resistance against the chain running underneath. Okay, I've put some wood and some weights down to make sure that it all glues nice and level. Again, it's paper, so it glues to the Copydex quite easily and quite quickly. So in a minute what I'll do is I'll quickly run the Magnorail again just to make sure there aren't any problems. If there is a problem under here somewhere, before the glue sets I can rip it up and find out what the matter is. But from my experience so far, it's actually, although it looks quite complicated and very fragile and problematic, once it's actually put down it's quite reliable. I haven't had really any problems with it apart from setting the tension of the chain. Once you've done that, it seems quite happy. I'm going to leave the road surface off at this end for the time being, as I still need to add the magnets into the chain and get all my cars and vehicle sliders ready to go. Obviously if you put the road surface on the whole chain, suddenly you've closed it all off and you can't then add the magnets and actually put the cars onto the track. Okay, so there we go, it's running. That proves that even with all the weight on top, it's not putting any load or friction onto the system. It's running nicely. You might see the odd few magnets here and there rushing in and out, but I need to add the rest of them now to get some cars actually working on the road. Okay, the glue has had enough time to dry, and I'm anxious to see if it's going to work properly. So I've got a Mark II Cavalier hatchback down the end there, ready to make the first run. And it's got a bit of a wobbly wheel. Oh yeah, it's definitely got a wobbly wheel. We'll have to take that to the garage. So far so good. Let's speed it up a little bit. That's a bit better. Okay, well, fingers crossed, hopefully it comes back. Please. Good. Okay, so I've got to be careful now. Got to make sure I stop the car before I get to the end of the road. Could cause problems. Oh, something's happened. Ah, there you go. That's what I was afraid of. Luckily I was by the controller, and as soon as I heard the noise I turned the system off, but that could have got quite nasty. Now I'm not entirely surprised that's happened, and it's not a concern. After all, the system will have friction on it. If you think about it, the Cavalier is travelling in this direction, and because underneath we have the slider with some magnets on it, that is going to put some stress on the system, and because there isn't anything to keep the chain sort of in check when it becomes in a state of tension, it just pops the wheel off, and you can see there we had effectively the car equivalent of a derailment. That said, that was quite a successful first run. We got from there all the way to the other end and back to here, so we did pretty well. And as I say, the only reason we had a problem was because down this end there isn't a road surface. Okay, so when this problem happens, it's not too difficult to correct. The chain is still connected. I managed to turn the system off fast enough. So what I've done is I've taken the vehicle slider off the track, so the whole system is now not under any stress, and I will now run it for a very, very short time to even out the chain at the back here, which should allow me to reinsert the wheel. Okay, so I've just pushed the slack in the chain that I've now got by running it back up there. I should now be able to put the wheel back on. Yep, wheel's back on. Now let's run it for a minute and make sure everything's okay. Okay, that's good. It's running again properly. You can see when it does this, it's not really the end of the world. And as I've said several times now, it's just because there's no road on the top of the chain, so it's easy for it to come out if it's under any stress. Okay, so now it's time to put on the vehicle sliders. You can see one of them there. I'll just run it for a second because it does look quite funny with no cars on it. Got all these funny little things going up and down. So I've been doing a fair bit of adjustment and tinkering with the system, as it is a particularly long run and certainly exceeds, I think, what Magnorail really intended it to be used for. But it is working. It has needed a bit of fiddling, mostly to do with the chain, with the tension of the chain, because of the length. So over here I removed a section of the road because I had a couple of problems and I needed to see what the chain was doing at this end. And again, as I said earlier, it's handy using a paper road surface, as you can peel it off and get to the mechanism underneath. So putting the sliders on is really very simple. In the chain there are some magnets which you insert, so you can see you've got two square magnets in there. They're just pushed in with a pair of pliers, no glues needed. They're a really firm fit. So just push those in, and then you've got the slider itself. Knock it over, there we go. So that's the slider. You cut it off with a sprue, bend one end of it vertical, cut the other end of it off. I prefer to bend the other end up and then cut it off, just so each leading edge is nice and smooth. And then on the top of it, you've got these extremely small magnets, very, very fiddly to work with, so you have to be quite careful. I've just glued them on with some super glue. And then through testing, I found that I need a little bit more magnetism. So on the leading part of the slider, you can see I've put two magnets on there. And the reason for that is I'm using sort of British 00 scale vehicles, and they are typically die cast, so they are quite heavy. You know, to me, they don't weigh anything, but to something as small and as delicate as this, they are quite weighty. So I have had to add an extra magnet onto the slider. Your experience may differ depending on the type of vehicles you're going to be using. And then to put them on, just do that, and there you go, it's ready to go. If the vehicle slider comes loose, falls off the road, car has an accident, whatever it might be, you can just place it on the road surface and move it about, and you'll find the magnets eventually. Different cars are going to behave differently, so it's going to be a case of trial and error to see what vehicles work best. Some may not work very well at all, and I may have to discard those, park them at the side of the road, put them in a car park or something. But let's give a Ford Fiesta Mark 1 a go and see how it performs. It's running a little bit jerkily at the moment, so that may be some excess slack in the chain around this sort of area. So I'll keep an eye on that, see if we can improve it. And I've experimented at the end with a different road surface. It's the same thickness, but it's straight card instead of shiny sort of paper. So we'll see if the Fiesta comes back. That's a good start. We're going to make the turn. Yes, it has. Oh, fantastic. Okay, I've just reset the car. It will sort of drive over that, but it's not brilliant. So until the road surface is complete, I'm just resetting the cars manually. This is about as many sliders as I think the system will take. Again, I have pushed its limits pretty much to the end. So there's about 12 cars that will eventually be running on here, but might get away with a few more. But I don't want to break it, put too much stress on it. This will provide enough scenic interest. You can see our Fiesta is on his way back. Okay, I've just put in a temporary piece just to cover that over for the time being, and now I shall try and get as many cars as possible running at the same time. Okay, I've been doing some experimentation, and I'll show you how I've done it in a minute, but I have managed to get a van going on the system. The difficulty is getting these things to take the turns, because they are quite heavy. You can see how much of a violent U-turn that is for the van to take. It seems to be going okay. I'll do a bit more testing before I show you what I've done in case it doesn't work. Managed to add an excellent vehicle to the road. So far it seems to be working okay. There were loads of these about when the layout was set. And we've also added British Rail Sherpa van, which appears to have a bit of polystyrene stuck to one of its wheels. But, I'm going to keep testing. Stuff like the Mini, obviously, that thing is very, very light. Works perfectly, no problems at all. Some of the other cars that are a bit bigger need a little bit of engineering. Okay, I've got all the cars running, and just to put things into perspective, I've got a train running as well. You can just see how much this baseboard has been brought to life by the addition of the road having working vehicles. Okay, so to get some of the larger vehicles moving, there are a couple of things that you can try and do. As I've said a couple of times now, these are all die cast. They're all quite heavy, relatively speaking. The system assumes you're using HO plastic vehicles, which are a hell of a lot lighter. Okay, so let's take a look at the Volvo. And what I've done, as you can see, try and get it in focus. There we go. So where the screw was that held the chassis to the body of the Volvo, I've put a small piece of tubing, which is just a bit of insulation off a bit of wire, and I've put it in there so that if we look at the vehicle sort of from there, you can see that that tube sticks all the way down to the road. Now the advantage of that is, if we look at the slider, the upstand on the front of the slider goes all the way through the tube, so there is no sort of space for the vehicle to be able to rock and move about, and that seems to help it tremendously get around some of the tight turns. On larger vehicles I've done the same thing, so you can see there's a piece of tubing which just helps it when it's being pulled left and right around the corner. But the main thing I've had to do for the larger stuff is I have used a larger magnet on the leading portion of the slider. Here's the magnets that come in the kit. You can see the larger magnets, the ones in the middle and the ones at the bottom. They're for going into the track, I've not needed to use any of those ones at the bottom because they're for using the bicycle or using the boat, and I'm using the vehicle sliders, so they give you the bigger square magnets for those. The tiny little magnets on top, those are the ones that are for putting in the vehicle sliders. So if we have a look under the Volvo, there they are, and they're very, very small. So for the larger vehicles, the vans and such, I've used one of those large magnets on the leading edge, and that just makes sure that this particular vehicle slider is very much planted to the road, and it's going to force the van to follow the direction that it's going in, and it seems to be much more reliable. I haven't noticed any noticeable difference on the amount of drag on the chain. The motors, the system doesn't seem to struggle, but then again, I have got quite a lot of it set up, and this is only one slider with one of the large magnets fitted to it. So I imagine I can probably get away with maybe a maximum of about 3 sliders like that, which will just allow me to operate some of the larger vehicles on the road. So as an example, we'll swap the Sherpa van for this Mark III transit van and see how it performs. You can see that big magnet really helps. And of course the other beauty of the system is I can just swap cars over. So if I get a bit bored of the selection that's running on the road at the moment, I can change it for other vehicles that I have available. So it can keep everything really interesting, rather than having to motorise each vehicle individually, and then if you wanted more vehicles you have to get more motors, stuff like that. With the Fowler system, with this, you just take the vehicle off and put a different one in its place. Well, there you go. That was my experiences of installing Magnorail for the first time. It certainly wasn't easy. It was a bit of a challenge, but I enjoyed it, and I'm really pleased to have a working road on the layout. It just looks so good. So if you've got this far, thanks for watching. Hope you found it interesting, got some ideas, inspiration. And as always, if you're looking for more 1980s model railway stuff, then you can check out Dave at Dean Park Station, and I'll also leave some links in the description to stuff relating to Magnorail and some other YouTube channels that are worth checking out also. So that's it from me, and I will see you again in the next video, which should be focusing on some of the sidings that I'm going to be putting in near the branch line.